Hello, Ahorja. Welcome to Stories, Legends and Wonders of Oran. Oran is also known as Inis Mór, the largest of the three Aran Islands. I'm Dara Malloy, Dara Ómé Lia Ascailge.
Well, today we're in the townland of Eochla in the very middle of the island, and I've climbed up to the very top of the hill. It's the highest point, and there in front of me is the lighthouse, the old lighthouse. I'll talk about it in a minute, but it never really worked. It was put in a stupid place. But to the left of me there, just to show you the whole picture, we're going to go and see all these places individually. Over there now that you're looking at is the ringfort of Eochla, Dún Eochla. And if you look carefully, between the ringfort and the lighthouse is the Dolmen. You can see it there. We're going to visit that too. So that's our stories and legends and mysteries of Aran for today. All around me here are beautiful views, of course. We're up on a height of Connemara. We're looking directly at Galway Bay there. So you see the County Clare down on the right. That's Blackhead, and beside it there, Cliffs of Moher. It's not a great day for visibility, but you can see it more or less. So then as I come around heading north, you see the coastline of Connemara, and the lower hills there are the Man Turks. And then as we go further towards northwest, I suppose, you see the 12 Bends, the bigger mountains. And behind those then is Westport and Clifton. But that's the view that we have from here on the Aran Islands, and most of us have this view from our house because all our houses are built on this side, the sheltered side of the island, looking out at the coast of Connemara, which is about 9 miles away as the crow flies. The boat takes a little longer because it leaves from in the back of a bay on this side, Kironan Bay, and it travels over to Rossaville, which is also a fairly long inlet on the other side, so probably 10 or 11 miles if you add on those two bits as well. Now we're having a look at the Lighthouse of Eochla here behind me. It's an impressive building with beautiful cut stone, and beside it a dwelling house for the lighthouse keepers, and beside that again a walled garden where they could grow their food. But personally I wouldn't like to live up on the top of the island. It's very exposed. You're like an ascetic monk up here. You're exposed to all weathers. But the building of the place, it began apparently in 1818, so a long time ago, when lighthouses were just beginning to be built all over the British Isles. And you can see the very large boulders that were used to build the lighthouse, already cut, pre-cut, and then brought up here. And I've heard a description of it. They were brought here one by one, pulled up the hill, very, very steep hill, by a very strong stallion, the strongest horse on the island. And even that horse couldn't do it on his own. He had to be attached to a metal rope. And there were men at the top here of the hill winding the rope up to help the horse pull each boulder up one by one. So totally painstaking job of building this whole place, only to find that when it was built and opened, it didn't work. It was too far away from the coast. It's about 1.5 miles that way to the shore, and it's about 1.5 miles this way to the shore, or more. And it just wasn't the right place for a lighthouse. They made a big mistake. So by the mid-1800s, they had abandoned it. It was a complete folly, a complete disaster. And since then, it's been bought by various people and tried to make use of it. At one stage here, it was a little museum for showing how people lived here in the past. But today, it's just a ruin. Now, from the lighthouse, we can walk over along this track to see the Dolmen, and that's an exciting thing to see, one of the oldest monuments on the island. So here we are now on the last stage of our little walk across the track, and you can see the Dolmen there in front of us, and don't mistake it for the water tank that's beside it. The water tank is a modern feature of the Aran landscape, funded by the government to encourage farmers to collect rainwater, and made it much easier for them than to give water to their cattle, because when rain falls here, it disappears underground. There's no way of, there's no streams, there's no ponds, there's no even pools, nothing. So water tanks were built, and you can see it's a clever structure. The rain falls and it all flows into the tank, and you can see it's working because the tank is absolutely full. That's because we had terrible rain over the last week here. But generally they are full, so they do their job very well. But no, that's not the monument. This is the monument here. And it's very, very ancient. It's probably 5,000 years old, and it establishes the historic fact that people lived here 5,000 years ago, which brings really the occupancy of this island right back to almost the earliest times. Like 5,000 years ago is when Newgrange was built. So you're talking now about the Tuatha De Danann, even before the Celts arrived in Ireland. So that's really, really far back. Now it's obviously it has deteriorated over the centuries and over the millennia, and it's falling apart a bit, but isn't it wonderful that it's still here at all? That it hasn't been taken away by other people living here over the centuries to use for other purposes. And you can see there was a little bit of a design attached to it. These dolmens, they're called wedge-shaped tombs because they're wedge-shaped. And you can see it's higher at the front than at the back. And that was deliberate. And it was used for the burial of bones. So if you or I died and we were a member of the elites, in other words, the highest class of the tribe, then your body might be kept for a year, be buried in a shallow grave until all the flesh had gone off the bones. And then the bones would be gathered up and put here into this monument. So it was a way of celebrating and remembering the ancestors. This is a monument to the ancestors, and it was filled with the bones of the ancestors. And I suppose if you were to find bones there now, which I'm sure you won't, it would establish just how old it is and how far back the ancestors go. So a bit like, some of us have imagine this idea of the tomb that Jesus' body was buried in, and a stone was across the surface of it. It might be a bit like that, except that it wasn't a fresh body put in there. It was just the bones of a body put in there, and there were lots of bodies in there, so a little bit different. But it might indeed have had a stone across the front of it, which people moved away when they, in their rituals, put the next set of bones in and honoured that particular ancestor. So not alone are they built wedge-shaped, and that is the architecture of them all over the country. The small ones are wedge-shaped, but also they all face west. And that's a notable thing too. Why do they face west? Well, in Ireland, west traditionally is where the next world is when you die. It's not up in heaven directly above us, as we might think today. It's out to the west. It's where the sun sets. So the sun sets not just on the day, but on your life. And when the sun lays out a golden road across the sea that lands at your feet, that's the invitation for you to take that road into the next world when your time comes. So where you're going to head to is Tir na Nog, that's one word for it, a place where you are in perpetual youth, where you're no longer suffering, and where you live forever. And there's plenty of stories in our Irish tradition about Tir na Nog. So whether they come from that particular period 5,000 years ago or not, they could, we don't know. But this wedge tomb is directed towards the west because that's where the souls of the dead are believed to go. Now it's well worth your visit coming up to the top of this hill because you have three things you can see at least. You have the lighthouse, you have the dolmen, the wedge tomb, and then directly behind the dolmen you have the ringfort, Dún Eochla, which is also very interesting. So let's go and see the ringfort now. Now to get into the ringfort itself, which you can do, you have to walk around to the right of an outer wall. This isn't the wall of the fort itself, it's the next wall out. There in fact are three circular walls around most ringforts, and I believe they are around this one as well, certainly two around this one. So you have to walk around the outer wall until you get to a gap in the wall, so I'm taking you that way now. Now I'm in and back around again the other way. So we were travelling to the right of the little track in to get through that gap in the wall, and now we're travelling back to the left, and we're walking around the inner wall. So it's a bit like a maze or a labyrinth. So now coming into view is the whole of, I suppose, the main village of Inis Mór, Kilronan. You can see it there in front. If I zoom into it there now, you'll see it more clearly. And you see the village, and there's the pier, and you see Kilronan Bay, and then across from it you see Inis Mór and Inis Mór, and in the mist you see the coastline of County Clare as well, and the cliffs of Moher. So it's a wonderful view from up here, and even if there was no fort or lighthouse up here or dolmen, it's still worth coming up here just for the view. It's really fantastic. Now we walk around the remaining track into the fort itself. There's only a very narrow entrance, so huge high walls, extremely thick, and just one narrow entrance. And guess what that's about? Yes, it's protection, isn't it? Very hard to scale those walls, and the narrow entrance very easy to guard and protect. So these were tribal peoples, and they did have enemies. Even though living on an island was a protection in itself, you still had to keep an eye out, and you could certainly keep an eye out up here. Look at what you can see from the door. You can see all around, so you can see boats coming, and you can get ready to resist them, probably down at the shore first, and maybe retreating back up here if you have to. But yeah, Ireland was a tribal place, and not every tribe was friendly with every other tribe. Some were enemies, I suppose, and some are friends, so you did have to watch your back. Now we're into the fort itself. It's a beautiful circular wall, very well built, of stone, local stone obviously, and with a platform on the inside where I presume guards could walk around, keep an eye on things. And in the middle today is this large collection of stones, which is a bit misleading because I believe that this fort was tidied up in the 1800s by the government, and I think what they did was they collected up all the stones that were in here that were lying around loose, and they just put them all in one place. And I think that's what you see here, because I can't imagine what other purpose this would have had. I mean, these ring forts were all over Ireland at the time, and people lived inside them by building little huts inside. So you had either an oval or a circular hut made of stone, 2 feet maybe in height, and then you put a cone-shaped thatched roof onto that. And you probably crawled in. You probably didn't walk in. You probably crawled in, because really it was only used for sleeping or for giving shelter to the children. That you could possibly put a fire in the middle, because the thatch was porous enough to allow the smoke out through the thatch. So people possibly did cook inside, but they also had a cooking place outside, which they called a Fullachafia. And we'll see that when we visit Dún Eochla. There's an example of one up there of how people cooked outside. So you can imagine a number of families living up here, all belonging to the one tribe. The people who lived in a protected enclosure like this were generally the higher classes. So you know the tribal societies had a higher class from which were chosen the kings and queens. All the sort of nobility came from that. And then you had the middle class, who were all the skilled workers that the tribe needed to do the fishing and the agriculture and the building and the making of swords and even making of jewellery and making of clothing. So much had to be done by skilled people. So they were the middle class, very, very important. And then the lower class were the workers, who you needed plenty of those to build these walls, for example, and carry all the stones and do lots of other manual work and menial work. And then tribes sometimes had slaves as well, people they'd captured, possibly from other tribes or possibly from abroad, where they went on raids to the west coast of Wales or Cornwall or Brittany, places close by, relatively speaking. And if they could grab a few young people especially and bring them back, they were great to have as slaves. So unfortunately that was part of Irish society at the time. You also kept peace with some of your neighbouring tribes by having intermarriage between them. That was usually a good idea. So you'd give, if you were a king, you might give your daughter to the next tribe's son, and that would create a bond between the two tribes. Or also you could exchange children. So I might give my child over to the next tribe to rear, and they'd give one of their children to me. That was another way of keeping the peace. But obviously you still needed a fort like this to protect yourselves from those with whom you were not living peacefully and whom you were afraid of. So unfortunately, Celtic society was a warrior society. From early on in your childhood, you grew you went into training for war, whether you were a man or woman, and the only way to avoid that was to join the Druidic order, if you like. And there was one half of the tribe where the Druids, who also included the bards and the ovates and all the seers and the diviners and all these people who were into this sort of more otherworld things, and maybe into art and poetry and singing, music, all that type of thing. They were all part of the Druid side of the tribe, and they didn't have to train for war. But anybody who wasn't a member of the Druidic tribe would have had to train for war, both men and women. So that was a big part of the whole way of life of people at the time. So building a protective wall around you might keep you safe. And at various parts of this wall, you can see that there are steps up. There's some steps up over there. So you can get up on the roof, not the roof, but the top of the wall, and you can have a look out. And let's go up and have a look. So I'm up, and it nearly killed me, making sure I didn't fall with the camera. But an aerial shot of this place would show you that there is an outer wall around this, at least one outer wall, and probably there were two at one stage. Maybe those have been taken apart by people who needed to build other walls. Down below us here is a circular building. It looks like another ancient monument, but in fact it's a modern water tank. That's the water tank that feeds the whole island with rainwater that's treated and sent around in pipes to the whole island. And for planning permission to build it, the builders were required to cover it with the stone of the island, and that's what's happened. It cost as much again to put the stones around the outside of the tank as it did to build the tank itself. But at least it's sort of more or less invisible on the landscape now, and it won a few prizes for the cleverness of its design and architecture. And it's done the job very well here. Some of the other islands, the other two islands here, Inis Mór and Inis Mór, do suffer from water shortages in the summer. We rarely do. This tank is so big that it manages to supply the whole island for maybe up to 6 weeks or more, even when there's a drought. So we're very thankful for that. So just to finish off our little visit now to the very highest point of Inis Mór, where you find the Lighthouse, and then the Dolmen, and then Dún Eochla, the ringfort. By the way, these ringforts were lived in up till about the year 1000, up till about the time of the Vikings, so they're not as old maybe as you think. But of course people lived in ringforts forever. So this one here sort of marks the end of that particular era of how people lived. But you can imagine them going right back, because that's how people lived up to 5,000 years ago, I imagine. When you're going around the island, do remember to bring in your pocket, like I have here, the Legends in the Landscape, my book about the island, which brings you to every part of the island, shows you how to get there, and when you do get there to any individual place, you'll find stories and information and history about the place, and you'll certainly find that for here up at the top of the island as well. So don't go without it, because it'll give you all the background you need for visiting every aspect of the island, and you'll miss nothing. Thank you for listening. Enjoy yourselves and be careful.
These stories and all the other stories that are to be found on the Aran Islands can be found in my book Pocket Guide to Oran, Legends in the Landscape, and that's available from our website www.ashlingpublications.com, with Ashling spelled AISLING, so ashlingpublications.com. There's one other book there on your screen, The Globalization of God, Celtic Christianity's Nemesis, which was my first book that I wrote apart from the Pocket Guide. I wrote the Pocket Guide a long time before it. But this was, if you like, my first, more intellectual, more academic type book. It's a study of history, really, and an interpretation of history to show how Christianity really emerged from Judaism, and how Christianity took on the idea of becoming a global church. To do that, it had to sort of be based in Rome as its sort of centre, with the Pope becoming, if you like, the CEO of the organisation, and equating himself to the Emperor of Rome, and the whole thing then became a very authoritarian structure. And as that version of Christianity spread throughout the world, especially on the back of colonisation, which was the main way of spreading it, so it was spread by violence and by a lot of destruction and a lot of removal of indigenous spiritualities. That was the downside of it, that all the indigenous ways, if you like, discovering the divine in their lives and expressing that in their mythology and in their sacred practices were all wiped out, which was such a shame. It was a destruction of diversity. And I suppose the book focuses on one of those indigenous ways of practicing Christianity, which was the Celtic Christian tradition, a tradition steeped in its own Celtic spiritual background, which had many gods and goddesses. So a very different form of Christianity. So part of this storytelling that I call the globalization of God is the story of the wiping out of Celtic Christianity. It happened first where it had spread throughout Europe and in Britain, and it happened then much later back in Ireland, which had never been part of the Roman Empire, so it took longer to subject that to Rome, but it did in the end with the Norman invasion of Ireland in the 12th century. So if you're interested in history, you might like that book too.